Alrighty, so we just got done with the live stream from the Campfire Chat. There was actually a pretty significant amount of changes that the developers made based off of the feedback from players from the PTR. So shout out to everybody who participated in the PTR and made your voices heard. They have unironically changed a lot of really good stuff here, and I'm really excited for the vast majority of them. And other than a few things over here in the Y column, I basically think every single thing that we heard in the Campfire Chat is mostly a good thing. So I went through and I just made a very quick tier list of like the most important stuff from it. All of these are going to be basically generalized concepts, so like things that apply to the entirety of the game. Like, yes, I have Ebon Pearson here, and yes, I have Dust Devils here, but it's mostly so I can talk about why they made the change and why it's important. And I just want to kind of go through them row by row so that one, you can get a comprehensive list. So like, feel free to just like take a snapshot right here if that's all that you want to do. I'm not going to be offended by it. I'll also put in timestamps to like each one of the tiers, just so you can get my own opinion on how impactful I think that these things are. And let's go ahead and go through them as fast as possible, so I'm not wasting any of your time, and you don't have to also basically watch the exact same length as the Campfire Chat itself to get all the information that you need. So here in the Y tier, we have 4 changes that aren't good or bad. They just really beg a question why. The first one is Ebon Piercer. So for people who are unaware, Ebon Piercer, I put out a video about this, was super bugged because the additional projectiles that it fired off all seem to have a 100% lucky hit chance coefficient, which is not what Blight has as a lucky hit chance coefficient. And they were triggering multiple times per second, and it was just like absolutely deleting stuff in the game. Now, they fixed it so that, and it's a little bit hard to understand exactly what they meant, I'm on the side of they made it so that Ebon Piercer's additional projectiles do not carry a lucky hit chance. Only the Blight spell will, but not the additional projectiles. Now, why is this in the Y column? It's a nerf, technically speaking, not really, it's a bug fix. But the reason why it's in the Y column is because this is a fundamentally different way for this single unique item to work with lucky hit chance. So just to give you an idea, Crew Wars Embrace, the cool new gloves that say that your Blood Surge now casts mini novas, those mini novas have a lucky hit chance. Similarly, the other unique amulet that does something like this, Death Speaker's Pendant, the mini surges from this item also have lucky hit chance. The list goes on and on. Deathless Visage, which says that your Bone Spear now leaves behind explosives, those also carry lucky hit chance. Now, how come Deathless Visage gets the benefit of having more lucky hit chance than it's intended to, but Ebon Piercer doesn't? The reason why it's here is because I think that this will speak to a foundational change, that basically the fact that lucky hit chance being derived from additional projectiles from unique effects in the game has been a bug this entire time and was not intentional. And as such, I think that this is going to lead to changes that will further reduce power from the lucky hit system, at least most notably on the Necromancer. So it's here right now because it goes, well, why aren't the rest of the items changing? And also just as like a little bit of a Nostradamus moment of, I'm going to call it, this is not meant to be working this way in the game. They're going to get removed, and we may not see power added back onto builds with this change. They changed the armor cap in the game. If you were unaware, you basically had to continue to scale your armor to meet higher and higher level monsters. So if a monster was level 100 and you were level 100, you needed 9,230 armor to be able to cap out against them, giving you 85% physical damage reduction, similar to how elemental resistances cap out at 70% without any other weird things in the game going on. Now, what's going to happen is if you're fighting a level 105 monster or a level 150 monster, or heck, maybe a level 200 tormented boss, you still will only need 9,230 armor. The reason why this is in the Y column, because it's just strictly a buff, right? We are all just significantly stronger now, don't need nearly as much armor. You don't need to use things like Juggernaut. This character right here that I'm showing you on screen that I currently have set up is sitting at a whopping 9,172 armor. I just need 100 more armor, not even 60 more armor to hit cap, technically 58 armor for the people doing math at home. And what that means is that I don't need to run a single defensive aspect that says gain armor at all on any of my gear to hit cap. That's good for people to have a very simple system to engage with and to figure out the puzzle of armor. I'll go ahead and let you know it's just put a single armor roll or 2 armor rolls on your gear if you don't temper on a total armor roll. And you just don't need to do anything else for this. It's a simplification that leads to complete redundancy of like Juggernaut doesn't need to be in the game. Disobedience doesn't need to be in the game. Putting skulls into your jewelry doesn't need to be in the game. You will hit armor cap with 2 affixes, and that's just uninteresting. I wish that there was some reason to continue to get armor, whether at like diminished values to continue to reduce physical damage or something. And it's fine if the game gets more simple like this, but it's been balanced in a way that armor used to matter, and now it just doesn't. And I think that kind of stinks. They added the fact that you'll be able to get a Resplendent Spark from the Iron Wolf rewards from the season. That means that players will be able to get up to 3 Resplendent Sparks in this season. And here's my question. Why are we stopping at 3? Now, I hear you, all of the elitists out there, all of the people putting in 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, 700 days a year. Casuals shouldn't just get free handouts. We shouldn't just be able to get free handouts. I need my self-value to be worth the fact that I grinded for Ubers. I do. I hear you. I also play this game a ridiculous amount. But here's my question. What is the purpose of 3 Resplendent Sparks? What this means is that after completing the easy content in the game and then killing a single level 200 tormented boss, if you drop an Uber unique that you don't want, you get to make 1 Uber unique that you do want. So it still requires the person to have farmed an Uber unique at all, which means that they deserve the Uber unique that they get. It also means that, let's say you get your second best Uber unique. Are you really going to break it down just to craft your best one? Probably no, right? Because there's no guarantee that you're going to get another Uber unique. So that means that you have to go out and farm at least 1 more and either get lucky that's the one that you want, or a duplicate or one of the ones that you don't want, and then bada bing, bada boom, what you have is the 2 Uber uniques that you want for your build. But it required you to farm 2 Uber uniques. So it's somebody who deserves to have them effectively getting nothing out of the system other than a single roll of like no drop protection. I argue that you should just get 4 Resplendent Sparks throughout the season, 1 for doing the season's journey, 1 for doing Uber Lilith, 1 for killing the one of the tormented bosses, and 1, hear me out here, for running a Nightmare Dungeon 100. That's right. I think if you clear a Nightmare Dungeon 100, that you should get at least 1 Resplendent Spark because you've done content that's the hardest content in the game up until you enter into the true end game, which is now the pit, right? How is that not a benchmark? How is that not a hallmark? How is that not one of like the progression goals across the board of stuff that you're doing in the game? I think that's very reasonable. And the fact that it is 3 Resplendent Sparks, it might as well be none as far as I'm concerned. This is probably going to be the most controversial point, and it really comes down to how you personally feel about something called a set item. They have added gear sets to the season's journey, very similar to how they added gear sets literally in the form of set items in Diablo 3 to whatever that season's journey was called. What they're going to do is they're going to pick a build from each one of the classes that's kind of the flavor of that season. And as you progress through the season's journey, you will get the gear for that character. The builds that they've picked for this season is Dust Devils on Barbarian, Pulverize for Druid, Minions on Necro, Incinerate on the Sorceress, and Barrage on Rogue. Now, the reason why this is in the Y category, you know, oddly enough, I was like just arguing for the casuals, and now I'm going to be a little bit of an elitist, but I promise you I'm not anti-casual here. By creating a set of aspects, which is basically what this boils down to, right? Like, while the gear might have decent enough stats for your build, it's not going to be anywhere near optimized gear here, right? You're not going to get perfect gear. You're just going to get a starter set of gear so that you can be playing a build by the time you finish the season's journey. One, that boils down to just getting the aspects. Are they going to be perfect rolled aspects? Maybe. Are they going to be mid-roll aspects? Maybe. It's hard to say. They didn't give us the exact details. But once you salvage these, they just go into your Codex of Power. And what that basically resembles is what the season's journey already did. In the season's journey, as you progress through it, they would add in the new aspects that they had put in for the season. They would put in changed aspects or aspects that were also kind of flavor of the month. So in season 3, they put in Shattered Spirit, which says when you use Bone Spirit, you shoot out bone shards that all generate essence. The cool part about not getting a tailored set of gear was that it begged for innovation and testing. Basically, every single Necromancer build in Season 3 while leveling should have been using Bone Spirit as a mana generator, with Shattered Spirit. It was just like strictly better than basically any other resource generation tool that you could possibly use, but it was super unintuitive and not something that people would necessarily look to do until people figured it out and popularized it. I think that that's a really cool outcome from giving people access to new aspects that otherwise they have never seen before, because it gives you the freedom to test it out and make your build better and come to interesting conclusions. By them giving you a set of gear, while it absolutely will help out a casual game player's experience to be able to test out the build that Blizzard thinks you're excited to play, what it does hamper is your ability to learn how to play without those things, which for a new player I think is incredibly important in this video game, because if you don't understand the systems at play, you don't know how to make informed decisions about how to make your build better or how to innovate on your build. If they just say, here's the Dust Devil Barbarian, you're going to get your gear, you're going to start playing with it, you're going to go, cool, I did the Dust Devil build. This hasn't empowered me to have gear for any other class. I'm probably incentivized to continue to get good gear for this class. And then if it turns out that I don't like it, I'm kind of at the same starting point, except now I have a bunch of aspects that are probably not relevant for my build in some meaningful way. The thing that I don't like about it is that it is one step removed away from just saying, here's your seasonal set. And because it's the seasonal set of gear, they probably want to make it good, right? They probably want to empower it. Maybe they kind of buff it up a little bit more than everything else. So while it's not necessarily the best build in the game, you're even less incentivized to branch out and try other things. What I dislike is the potential of harm for a player to be able to learn and grow and have an organic season experience. What I do appreciate is that casual players will have an easier time getting into the season. And at the end of the day, it doesn't stop an elitist like me or anybody else who's going to play the build that they want to play and get the gear that they want to get. But what I don't like is like the continued desire to make players less likely to learn how to play the game in a meaningful way. Into the C tier, and we're going to go through this a little bit faster because the why asked a lot of questions, but in the C tier, again, we're all just kind of getting into just straight up good stuff. They didn't necessarily give us something necessarily, but they did recognize that they are interested in giving magic and rare items some longer tail and some type of valuable use case in the end game, similar to Diablo 2, where it's, well, in Diablo 2, rare items are often the best items in the game. It's just really hard to find them, but magic items would sometimes be one of the best options for gearing that you could have. 320 gloves, 10 FCR, 15 all res rings, maximum magic find rings and amulets, etc. And basically Colin, one of the developers, just said like, we're looking into things that might allow us to do that. They added caps to stats on your gear. Most notably, you can only reach a total of 75% cooldown reduction from stats on your gear. Remember that this is reverse multiplicative. So your first 20% reduces your cooldown by 20%, and then the next 20% reduces the remainder, which would be 16%. So 2 rolls of 20% cooldown reduction gets you 36% cooldown reduction. So you're still going to need a lot to hit this cap, and most builds are going to be generally unaffected by this, but some builds were able to reach basically 100% cooldown reduction, meaning you could permanently spam abilities that weren't really meant to be permanently spammed. Secondarily, they have reduced the total size of things to a double effect. So it used to be you could get 5 rolls of corpse tendrils radius and literally pull in 3 different servers and different video games worth of monsters. Now you'll only be able to double the size of it. I think this is incredibly reasonable. You actually couldn't even see the corpse tendrils anymore because of how big they got, and it was just breaking the game. So that makes a lot of sense to me here. They have increased the amount of obols that you can carry at any given time, the limit, up to 2,500, and they made it so that pit now grants obols. Also, they made it so that Mutterlock chests, you've probably never seen one, but they'll now drop 500 obols. This almost was going to go into the why column, because the question is, why is there a limit to obols in the first place? Would it be too powerful if I could just save a bunch of them all up and then go back to town and do a single gamble loot? Would that be too good? Why would that hurt the player base? I think that there just shouldn't be a limit to obols, or it should be closer to like max materials where you can get like 100,000 of them. The only reason why I think that there's quite literally a limit is because the graphic in the game, like the area, would get too big and would look stupid. That's the only reason why I think that there's a limit in the game. There just shouldn't be, and I would rather them fix the UI so that's not a problem than have me go back every 2,500 obols now that you want to give me more in the game than you did previously, just to gamble a couple items, just to go back out and pick up the ones I left behind. It's like the worst like little mini circle game that you do in Diablo 4 right now, which is like, oh no, I'm in the Helltide, but I maxed out my Obols, but I still am doing events. So I guess I'll go back to town just to gamble a little bit and then have to look at the loot that I gambled. Now I'm losing time out on Helltide. Also, we didn't get specifics about this, but one of the questions in QA is like, what are you doing about unique items? And they said that a lot of the unique items got a pass over just like generally bringing them back up to speed. They aren't necessarily sure exactly how they want unique items to necessarily fit into the diagram that is player gear progression. They're kind of okay with the fact that you shouldn't just have a unique item in every single gear slot, and I agree. The problem being that the ability to temper and put aspects onto gear means that effectively uniques are serving the same purpose as they do in Diablo 2, where sometimes they are required for your gear to function, or they are only transitional pieces of gear. And because you can effectively craft rune words, in this case, take an item, re-roll it, put on 2 tempers, and then put on an aspect, legendary gear with tempered affixes are currently vastly overperforming unique items. And I don't like the concept of that just being okay. I think it would be much better if uniques were always an interesting build around option that begged the player to be able to ask the question, is there a cool way for me to incorporate this, and come to that conclusion, as opposed to them being strictly outclassed. I think there's a very fine difference between those two realities. For the B tier changes, these are just like strictly good at this point. One, they added a cool new icon to greater affix gear on the ground and in your inventory. So it's now the star that is like the indicator for greater affix will be on that piece of gear on the ground. You'll just see it immediately. And when you put it into your inventory, that piece of gear in your inventory will also have that little star on it, meaning that you can actually look at your gear and know which ones have greater affixes, as opposed to having to hover over every single one of them, just wait for the stat screen to show up. Right here, they reduced dust devils. Basically, there was too many dust devils and they were melting PCs. It absolutely needed to get reduced because it was ridiculous looking. I wasn't a big fan of watching all of those Cheetos fly around people's screens. The reason why this is not just like considered a Barb specific change, even though it is because it points to their willingness to take a cool thing and bring it back into line with like reality, as opposed to just kind of let it ruin the game experience for people. So I'm glad that they took this approach with Dust Devils, and I hope that they continue to do that every single time that they add in something that's really cool, but ultimately makes the game look like literal, just absolute garbage. Watching Dust Devil play like gameplay was watching swirling orange on the screen with a bit of a player outline. You didn't know what was happening, but sometimes you would hear like sound cues, and it was just absolutely terrible to watch. They changed fortified status to now grant 15% damage reduction as opposed to the 10% damage reduction that it did previously. This is a large change. It's good, like more people will have access to a stronger form of damage reduction, and some necro specific changes, which I'll make a different video on, is going to make it so that you basically just run Fortify on every single build now for free. And I'm going to touch more about the specifics in that video, but it is cool that they're looking at outdated systems that really don't have value and increasing that value to meet the demands of the game. Now, let's just see them change the Undaunted glyph so that that thing actually ever sees any use. They're rebalancing the ladder bosses, most notably the level 200 versions of the ladder bosses. They very specifically called out some of the balance requests and general like wisdom that Wudijo had gained from going and completing these bosses and seeing the differences in them. And what it basically means is that there were a ton of bosses that were just kind of like very slightly overtuned. Most of them weren't really that strong, and a lot of them that were an absolute joke. Lord Zir pops to mind here. So basically, I think you should expect all the level 200 ladder bosses to be harder than what you experienced in the PTR, understanding that they were super underpowered for whatever reason, and it's generally a good thing that they'll actually pose a challenge to players. They made a difference to how getting materials in the pit works for group play. So previously, it was basically like whoever opened up the pit got all the materials, and whoever else was there kind of didn't. So you got the gear from running the pit, but not the materials. Now it's going to be whoever opens up the pit is going to get 100% of the material drops at the end, and everybody else in the group will get 50% of the material drops. I think that's just like generally makes sense. It doesn't make group play just like strictly better in every single way, shape, and form. But what it does do is give you a reason to do group play, because before you were highly incentivized to only run solo. And while I absolutely understand that there's just like a ton of people out there who are like, I wish I could just play this game solo and be just as good as group play, I think it is ridiculous in a modern day multiplayer video game to not have some type of benefit for grouping up, right? It's like a strictly multiplayer online game. You should probably have some reason to be in a group. And choosing to play solo is a choice that you make to be able to enjoy that gameplay experience. So I think that both people can get what they want, and I'm glad that there is some reason to group up in the pit now as opposed to before, which was basically just to see if you could kill players for difficulty pit bosses. In the A tier, this is actually probably my favorite change, although I don't think that everybody will like recognize it for how powerful it is. Gambled items will now always be item level 925 once you hit level 100. This means that with the changes to obols and the more obols that you're getting, you can go legitimately like attempt to target farm for gear and most notably valuable aspects and good bases from gambling, whereas before, not only would you get magic items sometimes, but you would also continue to get just like base and sacred gear from gambling, even at level 100 in World Tier 4, which was just like such a slap in the face. Basically, half of your inventory was completely useless before. So now that everything will at least be item level 925, and those same items can like generate greater affixes, etc., gambling may legitimately become part of the meta for the majority of people. They've added in multiple cache types for being able to convert the materials from the pit. If you didn't run a ton of the pit, basically there's starter materials, rare materials, and then legendary materials. You need the last ones to be able to do the final 4 ranks of your Masterworking, the yellow ones for the middle 4, and then just the base materials for the first 4. The issue being that it doesn't automatically translate between the types. So if you run out of the lower tier ones, because you continue to run higher tier pit where they don't drop, you would have to go buy individual caches of 5 of the materials at hundreds at a time and then open them all hundreds at a time to then go back to Masterworking. It was trash city. It's still trash city. I don't think that you should have to actually convert these materials at all. It should just have a smart sliding scale that does it for you. But they recognized that there was a problem. They added in multiple types of caches, so you can just buy like 100, 100 at a time. We don't know what the numbers look like. And they are looking for a more sophisticated solve for this problem, which they recognize is generally due to address the fact that crafting materials were generally limited, most notably veiled crystals. They've made it so that sacred and ancestral items now break down to 2 times and 3 times their total materials, respectively there. On top of that, legendary items will also break down to an increased amount of veiled crystals always, and they also increased how much rare items break down into veiled crystals. So you don't have to pick up rare items. It's just strictly a benefit to how many salvaging materials that you generate per farming session, basically. But basically, these 3 changes right here should address the vast majority of like crafting issues that we were running into, especially in the PTR, which is just like nice to see that. They have also boosted both glyph experience and XP. They've like significantly boosted XP in world tiers 2, 3, and 4. And they've also just generally increased glyph experience while also increasing, sorry, this is a long run on here, but also increasing how many pit materials that you get from running Nightmare Dungeons. Remember, in the PTR, it only required 1 rune shard to be able to open up the pit. That was not the final number. It's going to be a lot more than that. And you would have to get these from running Nightmare Dungeons. So they increased how many of them you get from running higher tier Nightmare Dungeons to better incentivize you to go do them, obviously, but also make it less of a slog to finish leveling up your glyphs so you can go get into the pit. And then lastly, for the S tier changes here, most notably right off the bat, they removed the animation from Masterworking for ranks 1 through 3, 5 through 7, and then 9 through 11. You only see an animation when you're hitting the crits. So that's rank 4, 8, and 12, and you can skip the animation. The second best part about this is that they also removed the chance to fail on a masterwork. Before, you had a sliding scale of chance to fail, and every single time that you did fail, it would slightly increase your chance, and then once you succeeded, it would reduce your chance again. They removed that entirely. To be able to offset how much wasted material there was, they've increased like the cost of masterworking in general, but we don't have to sit there watching animations that we can't skip, and there's no chance of failure. So the only reason why you would reset a masterwork now is if you didn't hit the crits that you wanted, which is still going to be a thing. Like, people trying to get to perfect gear are going to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of attempts masterworking gear, which I think is perfectly fine. It was how much of my lifespan they were literally drawing out of my mortal coil by making me watch an unskippable animation, even though it said skip and then would still play. So I'm glad that they made these 2 changes. If this was all that we heard from the PTR, I would honestly have been happy. They have drastically reduced the veiled crystal price of imprinting gear. So they said it was 75 veiled crystals to imprint like a piece of armor, and it's dropping down to like 16. So it's basically an 80% reduction in aspect imprinting costs of veiled crystals to further reduce that bottleneck from our crafting. They've just generally buffed everything in Helltide. All of it drops more stuff and more cinders and more loot, and the Hellmaiden's better, and all the Doomsayers all now just drop loot. It's just all strictly better. Clicking a chest takes less time for it to like literally channel and happen. The interesting part here is that they've also incentivized people to actually participate in the Hellmaiden event as opposed to just be vultures. So before, if somebody summoned the Hellmaiden and they put in like 3 baleful or baneful hearts, everybody would get loot, which is perfectly fine. And that's still going to happen. But if you're one of the people who actually puts in a baneful heart to the ritual, you're going to get more loot. So all of a sudden it gives people a better incentive to actually go out and farm them themselves and then participate in these events. And on top of that, for the people who are still being vultures, they get to keep being vultures, but you get to be super cool and get more loot from that. Hopefully, they didn't seem too sure whether or not they had succeeded on this, but basically when you're fighting a pit boss before, the secondary like shadow boss effects could continue to trigger after you kill the pit boss, and then they could kill you, which sucked, and on hardcore would wipe your character, obviously. Now, they said that hopefully that shouldn't happen. The fact that they didn't confidently say it makes me think that we're going to run into some issues. So like, don't be surprised if it still happens a couple times and then they fix it with a quick hot fix. But at the very least, they recognized there was a problem and they said they tried to fix it. A really good change to the tormented bosses, the level 200 Uber bosses, is that it used to be 5 times the materials and 5 times the loot. Now it's going to be 3 times the materials for 5 times the loot. So it's now more efficient to run those bosses than it is to just run the significantly lower level bosses, which is really nice. It's cool that one, it requires less of those materials, so you can do it more often. But on top of that, you actually get something out of doing it other than just like the challenge of having accomplished it one time. While I think this was generally understood, I just wanted to point out that they basically made it so that boss summoning materials can kind of drop from everything in the game. They can drop from elite monsters, Tree of Whispers, the Hellborn and the Helltide, goblins, world bosses, the Hellmaiden can drop them. They're basically trying to sprinkle out world boss summoning materials to all of the content in the game. So you're not strictly like strapped to only doing Helltide to get Grigor or only running Nightmare Dungeons to get Beast in the Ice. And that's at least the approach that they're trying to take here. And then lastly, unironically, the most important change, and I'm just going to blow this thing up to 1,000. Mounts can now sprint in town. You don't have to move at slower than a slaughter aspect while you're in town, while you're on your mount. You can sprint in town on your mount. Holy God, thank you. This is such a good change. The fact that you couldn't before was bananas. I don't know who was out there with a radar gun trying to give me a ticket for getting through Kyovashad faster, but when you hop onto your mount, you can now spur through town and not waste as much time running around. Good job, devs. There we go. The mount is finally pretty good. Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much. But there you go. That's the entirety of the changes. This is my general tier ranking of how good I think they are. Again, I kind of have some whys. I kind of have some what was the purpose of this? You know, what are we trying to accomplish with it? I'll include the link to this down below just in case you want to see them again. I'm going to be putting out like Necromancer specific type videos later on, but there you go. I'm going to try to chop this down so I don't waste any more time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this helped you be able to navigate the changes from this Campfire Chat, and I look forward to seeing you in season 4. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.